What I wanted to do is take a few minutes. It's a 30-minute session, so what I thought I'd do is share some best practices around personalization, how it's evolved, really, and so what are some customers doing that really help us with personalization, and how do we become coordinated, right? We've all sort of grown up with website personalization, marketing personalization. Now the issue is, well, how do we coordinate that for a customer experience, right? So I'll start my story with an analogy. And back in the town I lived in, Plymouth, Michigan, there was a guy who ran a clothing store named Fred Hill, and Fred was very, very good at personalization. So he's a single shop kind of guy, but Fred would say, he'd learn every customer. I was a great customer. And he always knew. So what brings you in today, Joe? And sometimes it was, I'm browsing, or help me out, Fred. Or sometimes it was, I've got 10 minutes because I'm a guy and that's how we shop. And so I'm going to take this one and I leave. But Fred was very good at purchase history. He didn't know this at the time, but he kept a swatch of every suit that you bought. So we had this card table, and there's your name on a card, and every suit that you bought, there it is, right? So when you come in later and say, oh, gee, Fred, I've got an interview coming up, or I just got a new job, or I need something to go with, he'd say, well, let's take a look at the card, Joe. This would go with that, this would go with that. And you get to expect and kind of appreciate that kind of customer experience, right? So much so that when I would go to a chain, it was such a stark difference, right? Which people don't know you, and they're pushing things that maybe I wasn't asking for. So it becomes a very welcoming kind of experience, right? Now that didn't stop Fred from selling me that leopard skin smoking jacket, but that's another story. I'm sure I'll get to use that someday. But the point is, aren't we all trying to do that with our websites, right? Jeff Bezos years ago said, well, I think it was back when we had 6 million customers. He said, I have 6 million customers. I should have 6 million stores. And he's serious about that. He's still serious about that today. None of us here are going to out-invest Amazon, right? We're not. We all compete with Amazon. Everybody at this conference probably does. But we're never going to out-invest them. I can tell you that from living in Seattle. If you try to hire developers, they all come with a couple offers from Amazon. So they have, none of us can afford that kind of investment, but we still have to compete. We have to get better at what we do for personalization. So this is a discussion around what can the rest of us do with mere mortal budgets, right? And so what I think we've evolved to, and sort of what I think some best practices are, is to look at not just first order personalization, which is who are you and what category do I put you in, but let's talk about some first and second order personalization routines and try to get to coordination, right? Coordination means it doesn't really matter if I clicked on your email or if I clicked on the display, or to Tom's presentation right before mine, what I search for on the site. Those are all clues about what I'm doing. But I should look at that in terms of, what can I do as a first order? And most people are doing this in terms of lifestyle segments, right? So a lot of our customers, have, I'm going to say, between 8 and 20 typical, not more than that, usually not less than that, of segments that people sort of fall into. If you get a little more sophisticated with this, you can be a member of a couple different segments. You just a higher score. So I may be a discount Debbie and have a score of 70, but I may also be brand loyal and have a score of 90 because I just love a certain brand, right? So there's first order stuff that you can do. We'll talk about examples of that. And then it gets a little bit harder when you talk about second order, which means now I have to take into account all my, this person's preferences, what do I know about that? all the purchase history. And in Smart Focus, we're good at this. We keep every purchase ever made, online or offline. It doesn't matter how long it runs, right? So we know, right, it's good information. You know, what people buy is typically tells you more about them than what they say they are, right? Merchandise drivers, we're all, you know, we want a customer relevant experience, but at the end of the day, we have merchandise that we would rather show a customer than some that we would not. And it's just that's just life in retail, right? So we have to take that into account, all that merchandise attributes, stock positions, margin positions. And then something I'll go into, which I think is really picking up steam, is this idea of top of the funnel versus bottom of the funnel personalization. And we'll talk about that in a minute. If you put all that together, it's all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to be Fred Hill in Plymouth, Michigan, who says, welcome back, Joe. I know who you are. I know what you bought. Probably know what you're going to do next. And customers really react well to that kind of experience. So let's go through some examples. And the idea of top of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, this came out of a pretty comprehensive experiment, project, whatever, from Yahoo about sort of, you know, the display of advertising, you know, and the content of that. And the point is, we all go through a funnel process to buy something, right? If top of the funnel means I'm probably looking at things like departments, categories, brands. I may have general search terms. Bottom of the funnel means I've sort of done my research. I've been through the fun of this, you know, comparing everything I want to compare. Now it's time to transact. And what people typically get wrong, and where personalization sometimes goes awry, is when you're putting the wrong kind of content to match the shopping top of funnel, bottom of funnel progression, right? So for example, if I go to Guitar Center and I type in, if I type in acoustic guitars, I'm probably in the top of the funnel, right? I want to learn maybe about brands. I want to learn about price ranges, right? If I go to Guitar Center and type in Taylor 310 CE, here's a guy that probably knows what he wants. So maybe we should have some transaction type of content, right? So what typically the mismatch is if I'm in transaction mode and you give me awareness content, that's not relevant to me, and vice versa, right? If I'm exploring and you say, hey Joe, 2 for 1, or $50 off of shipping, or whatever it is, I'm not there yet. I'm not with you. You're ahead of me in the funnel progression. So this is simple. This isn't 5 stages of purchase progression. This is 2. And sort of getting this right, say how can we use this to make our site more relevant and become more like, you know, how to become more like Fred Hill in Plymouth, Michigan, just by the way the site works, right? And by doing it, what the study shows is that if you get this right, it really does make a big difference on conversion, because you're at the end of the day, you're relevant, right? If I'm searching for, if you know I'm in the awareness mode, then that's awareness content. That's not necessarily buy now, right? And that leads to the right type of content that says, okay, this guy's ready to buy, and so here's a trigger, right? And that could be on the site, that could be an email, that could be a display, it could be a lot of things. The point is just think about your site, think about your customer's experience, and think about do you sort of have this approach, right? Can you tell if someone is top of the funnel, what do you do with that? Can you tell if they're bottom of the funnel, what do you do with that, right? Here we are at the Magento conference. So I'm now going to get into some examples, how Smart Focus works and how some of this can be put into practice, right? The good news is the Magento connector, the way personalization works is it's lots and lots and lots of rules. And they fire very, very quickly, and a couple rules win, and that's the result. But to do that, thinking back to our merchandise drivers, right, all the product drivers, the Magento connector sucks in all the product attributes you guys spent weeks and weeks, months and months building. The good news is all that gets sucked in. So all those, the whole attribute table, right? All those product stuff comes into the Smart Focus database. That's the good. The good news is that's half the battle, right? Now we still have to configure the customer rules. So what are my segments, right? How do I trigger top of funnel, bottom of funnel kind of stuff? What are my preferences? Things like that. But the Magento, that's why the Magento connector with Smart Focus works so well is it's a really good start, right? So all that work you've done comes right into the database. So what can you do with this stuff? Well, here's a little sort of tour, and I'll go through the bottom right one with a couple examples and talk about what some people are really doing here. But how do people use Smart Focus connected with Magento? First one, here are the most common use cases, right? Shopping cart abandonment, right? So self-explanatory, but we know that, the connector knows that, and so what emails are triggered, messages are triggered off of that event, right? It's all held in the database, so we know that. We know what the person bought a few times, their life history of purchases. So we can get very relevant with shopping cart abandonment kind of things and use that to trigger actions off the Magento site. Bottom left, transaction email. So this is the thanks for shopping. This is the, and using that, that sort of usually welcome email, which is, hey Joe, thanks for shopping. Here's some customer service details. Here's some dynamic content. Here's some product images. Here's some relevant things about what you just did. And because I know who you are, here's some relevant things about promotional link backs. So again, having the database of the transaction history, the customer's preferences, and the triggers, this Smart Focus makes this pretty easy, right? So you can set up triggers and say, it could be as simple as, if you're in one of these 5 lifestyle segments, this is the content you're going to get. Some is very specific to what the transaction just was. Why don't we use that real estate to say, here's some other content you might be interested in. Very common use case. Top right, automatic reactivation. So this is stuff that's usually set on triggers. And this can get pretty effective, right? Because every product, every department you have, products have a certain repurchase frequency. We don't buy dishwashers every day. We buy shirts and socks and things a little more often. So knowing that kind of information, right? The Magento data is synced with the Smart Focus database, right? Now we can do things like reactivation based on RFM, frequency, sort of last visit kind of stuff, or events, like lifestyle events that happen, which we know in the customer database, right? So doing reactivation or automatic triggers, similar example to the transaction emails, but now you're doing it as sort of the system is sort of watching. Here's a group of people in this segment that haven't had to have this behavior. We haven't seen them for this many days. Here's some content that is probably going to be relevant, right? And using first and second order personalization, right? It's more of a welcomed message than spam in my inbox. The bottom right is why we're here, and this is the bulk of what we do, is to personalize the experience for the customer on the site. And how do I coordinate that with the outbound marketing activity? So let's take some examples of that. Here's a very simple example where a customer, one of our customers, Fresh Pair in New York City, intimate apparel. They don't like it when I say underwear, but that's what it is. They have 12 lifestyle segments. So this is pretty basic. Now, the data in Smart Focus told them what those segments are, right? We let the data sort of tell you, here's a segment, they behave a certain way. Here's a segment, they behave a certain way. expert marketers get a hold of that data and they say, yeah, I understand your recommendation, but I'm going to change this a little bit. And you come up with stuff like this, right, which is newbies, gifters, well-heeled boomers. How you market to a baby boomer is completely different than a millennial. And so you sort of have to separate that. You have to figure out what the language is, what the content is, the frequency is, and the channels. Right, so a very basic piece of personalization, first order, is what known customer, right, trigger off the loyalty, the lifestyle segment, and that's the content you're going to see, right, based on some merchandise drivers in the database. If we get a little more advanced, we can talk about a known customer. Now we know who they are, we know their purchase history, but now we also know what's their return path. So what we're seeing is two pieces of real estate on the Magento site that says, well, I just put out an email campaign on acoustic guitars, and that's the content you're going to see based on who you are in your lifestyle segment on the top part of the page. But because I know a lot more about you, I'm going to take that opportunity to associate that with first and second order personalized content that might be very specific to you. So the top real estate is specifically off of that. How did the person get here? Well, they saw this email campaign. We know that. Let's coordinate that with the site real estate, right? And that's a little bit different than coming back on an organic visit. Joe's a good customer. Here he comes again. Yep, he's right on time. He visits every 9 days. And I know what I'm going to show him because I know who he is and I know how he got here. Same thing with displays, right? So you can use this. We're seeing customers sort of take not just one piece of real estate and trying to do everything in there, but to kind of break it up and say, am I top of the funnel? Am I bottom of the funnel? Maybe I show that on top, and very specific things on the bottom based on first and second order. So I did a survey of a bunch of our customers, and I thought, why not share some sort of best practices that we see up till now with personalization? One is, if you're going to do recommendations, show 6 or less. So people don't like scrolling forever to the right or anywhere, really, up or down. So the data says 6 or less. It does drop like a rock. The effectiveness of this, if you show 8 or 10, it drops quite starkly. So think about 4, think about 6. People want to know, what that is, but they want to see that in their head, and you can't comprehend 10 or 12 recommendations. It's just the data. The data says that's too many, right? I love this expression because it comes from the 1940s newspaper business, and we're still using it. But try to show this above the fold, right? Which means if you're going to show a personalization, show it without any scrolling necessary, right? The one that I think really is cheap to do, is just being creative, is don't say recommendation. Don't use the word recommendation, right? Because it sounds, the feedback on that is it sounds like a computer's doing something here. But so emotive wording means something that's on, this is on trend, or you may also be interested in things like that. But it's more personal, right? What typically doesn't work is other people bought this. The testing on that is, okay, that's nice. What does that have to do with me? Or the word recommendation, right? So think of creative ways about how do we show this, how do we phrase it, right? And use more emotive kind of phrasing to kind of show this in a better light. Basic stuff. Yep, you want to show recommendations. You want to have a one-click experience. Again, taking a cue from Amazon, we're not going to out-invest them. At least we can copy them and have a add to cart with any recommendation that's on the site. And star ratings are huge. So we saw that in the last presentation. But if you have this, great, show it here. If you don't, think about investing in ratings reviews, because this it's a huge drop-off, right? Recommendations without ratings, recommendations with ratings, stark difference in customer acceptance of those things, right? So that is kind of sharing what Smart Focus does, what we focus on, how we make our customer sites a little better. And what we're trying to do is make all these sites more relevant to the customer, right? Like I say, we're not going to out-invest Amazon, but we can put a lot of technology in your hands that sort of get there and get that really good personalization and customer experience without investing tens of millions of dollars a year, right? Thank you very much.